I'm a 29-year-old guy who recently went through a divorce from my 27-year-old wife. It turned out she'd been cheating on me with my estranged brother, who's also 27. I found out 4 months ago when she revealed she was pregnant. At first, she tried to claim the baby was mine, but my brother's frequent visits made me suspicious. So, I checked her phone and found evidence. When I confronted her, she admitted to the affair because she felt she had no other choice. My relationship with my family had been rocky since I left home at 18. They always treated me like an outsider, especially compared to my brother, who was the favorite. When I discovered they threw him a party without me, pretending it was for me, it hit me hard. Instead of celebrating my own achievements, they prioritized him to avoid him feeling left out. It was a breaking point for me. After leaving home, I financed my college education through loans and work, then shared a small apartment with a friend. I cut off contact with my parents, and they didn't reach out to me either. Years passed, and last year my brother messaged me online, saying our parents missed me and wanted to reconnect. Despite everything, I'm considering it. About 2 years ago, I got married to my ex-wife, and life seemed pretty good. However, I realized I hadn't fully moved on from the issues with my parents. Eventually, I agreed to meet them. Though awkward at first, they were making an effort to mend things, so I decided to reciprocate by inviting them to my home. This turned out to be a mistake. When my brother met my ex-wife, they started an affair, and she became pregnant. Initially, I was thrilled about the pregnancy, assuming the baby was mine. But my brother's increased visits, especially after learning about the pregnancy, started bothering me. His behavior, like touching my wife's pregnant stomach and talking to the baby, made me uneasy. Despite my ex's reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that my brother had more involvement with the baby than he let on, especially 6 months into the pregnancy. I made the difficult decision to check my ex-wife's phone while she was asleep. And unfortunately, my worst fears were confirmed. The text messages between her and my brother proved that the baby she was carrying was actually his, and they had been together for quite some time. What's more, my ex had no intention of ever telling me the truth. They planned to reveal the affair after the baby was born, get a divorce from me, and then she would be with my brother. They intended to live off the child support I would be paying. The next morning, I confronted her about the texts. Although she initially tried to deny it, she eventually confessed. This marked the end of my 2-year marriage. Predictably, my parents sided with my brother and my ex. All their promises about treating us equally were just empty words. When my ex and my brother announced our divorce and her intention to marry him on social media, it felt like a final blow. My entire family fully supported my ex-wife and brother's decision, showing no concern for how it affected my mental health and shattered my trust. For 6 months, my ex had lied to me, claiming the baby was mine, adding to the pain of losing not just my wife, but also feeling like I lost a child. Despite my anguish, my parents insisted this was for the best and refused to acknowledge my brother's betrayal. Instead, they expected me to join in the celebrations of my ex and brother finding happiness together. Unable to bear their indifference and betrayal, I cut my family out of my life. Unfortunately, this decision also complicated my divorce. My ex-wife walked away with a significant settlement and even my car, all because my family sided with her due to her relationship with my brother. She and her lawyer fabricated a narrative painting me as toxic and controlling, despite her own choices, and my family reinforced these false claims by citing my supposed misogyny and temper issues. Despite losing a significant amount of money in the divorce, I was relieved to retain ownership of the house. Finalizing the divorce brought a sense of closure, and I was grateful to be done with the whole ordeal and never have to interact with those people again. Fortunately, there wasn't a waiting period for divorce where I live, and my ex-wife didn't contest it, allowing me to swiftly move on. It was challenging to move past everything, but I threw myself into my work and focused on self-improvement to put this unpleasant chapter behind me as quickly as possible. My efforts paid off when I received a promotion just 2 weeks ago, along with a better position, salary, and even a new company car. It was a fresh start, and I couldn't have been happier about it. After deciding to treat myself to a solo dinner at one of my favorite restaurants, I made the mistake of sharing it online. Within a day or two, my mother reached out, asking me to visit them. I was puzzled since we hadn't communicated since the divorce, and they sided with my ex-wife and her false accusations. At first, I tried to ignore her messages, but she persisted, calling me incessantly. Eventually, she showed up at my office and refused to leave, even getting into an argument with the receptionist, which was embarrassing. In order to get her to leave, I promised to visit in a few days, and that's how I finally convinced her to go. A couple of days later, I reluctantly visited my family. They had used the settlement money to move into a larger house to accommodate the new baby, who was born just over 3 weeks ago. I assumed they were also using the alimony to cover expenses, but it didn't bother me much as it was only a small portion of my salary at this point, and I could afford it. When I arrived, my brother wasn't home, and my ex was asleep, leaving just my parents to talk to me. I didn't engage in small talk and waited for them to address why they had called me there. After about 5 minutes of awkward silence, my father finally brought up the reason for the meeting. My brother had been fired from his job, and the alimony and settlement were no longer sufficient to support them. They had seen my promotion post and hoped I could help them out financially given their dire situation. My parents had retired long ago, my brother was unemployed, and my ex wasn't planning to return to work anytime soon. The alimony couldn't cover the bills for a family of 5, especially with a newborn in the mix. While I understood the financial strain they were under, I was shocked that they had the audacity to ask me for help. After everything that had transpired, I was so stunned that I couldn't even muster a response for several minutes. Eventually, I snapped out of it and realized I didn't owe them anything. Without saying a word, I got up and left. As I reached the door and opened it, I was surprised to find my brother standing outside. My parents urged me to stay and listen, while my brother seemed alarmed to see me there. Still silent, I walked away, enduring the heavy rain that soaked me through. Feeling miserable and in a foul mood, I made my way to where I had parked my car outside their home. Then, something happened that I regret. My parents and brother followed me, and as I searched for my keys in my pocket, they pleaded with me for help one last time. It was unusual, especially coming from my typically smug and arrogant brother, a product of our parents' favoritism. They seemed genuinely desperate, but I couldn't contain my frustration. I lashed out, telling them to leave me alone and suggesting they beg on the streets if they were truly in such dire need, since a stranger might have more sympathy for their situation. After saying that, I got into my car and drove away, leaving them in the rain. I have to admit, it felt pretty good to leave my family behind, considering how they've mistreated me my whole life. It's been 2 days since then, and now I'm starting to doubt if I did the right thing. My mother has been texting me nonstop, and I can't shake off the guilt of not helping them out. I know I have the means to send them some money without it hurting me, but given everything that's happened, it feels like they're just using me. Frankly, I'm torn between helping them out with money, especially after they sided with my ex in the divorce. So I made the decision not to help them out. It was a significant choice for me because I felt incredibly guilty about potentially abandoning them. But then it hit me, they've been doing that to me my whole life. Even during the divorce, they threw me under the bus. So why should I hesitate to do the same to them? I told my mother to stop bothering me, warning her that I'd involve my lawyers if she kept it up, and it wouldn't be good for them. Naturally, that didn't sit well with them. A few days later, my brother showed up at my house to talk. He said he felt sorry for how we were treated during childhood, but he couldn't help being treated better because he was inherently superior. He also insisted I stop acting weird with our parents and just help them out like any normal child would. I couldn't help but laugh in his face at how ridiculous he sounded, spewing that nonsense. I told him that instead of trying to belittle me and manipulate me into helping them out, he should probably be out looking for a job and not wasting his time like this. That really seemed to hit a nerve because he started yelling at me, claiming I was just jealous that not only our parents but even my ex-wife preferred him over me. According to him, I was seeking revenge by refusing to give my family money. Instead of arguing with him, I simply agreed, saying that all I was doing was to get back at him, and there wasn't much he could do about it. That seemed to really get under his skin, and he threatened to come after me and force me to cough up the money one way or another. He warned me that I'd regret ever speaking to him that way. Honestly, I'm not taking any of that seriously at all. He can try to intimidate me all he wants, but I know he's not capable of doing anything to me. I'm completely unfazed by his threats. 3 days ago, my brother came by, attempting to persuade me to help them out, but he failed. My parents had already tried before, without success. So this time my ex decided to call me. I was hesitant to pick up, but I figured if I didn't, they'd likely come over and waste more of my time. So I answered. It was unbelievable how entitled and heartless these people could be. She started off politely, acknowledging that she and her family were struggling financially, despite recognizing that I had no obligation to help them after everything they'd done to me. She urged me to consider being the bigger person. She tried to evoke sympathy by mentioning how my parents had provided for me growing up and how she had tried to be a good wife. Yeah, right. Except for the part where my parents favored my brother over me, and she ended up cheating on me with him. I used to complain about this situation, so her attempt at evoking sympathy fell flat. I told her that while I sympathized with their financial struggles, I was already spending a significant amount on unnecessary alimony for her. Technically, she didn't even deserve it since she cheated on me, but she managed to manipulate the situation because my family had no qualms about lying and making me out to be the bad guy for their benefit. She began crying on the call, accusing me of being selfish and heartless, which was ironic considering her actions. Even when faced with her tears, I remained firm in my decision not to help. She then threatened to involve the law, claiming I'd left her no choice but to demand higher alimony and drag me to court to humiliate me once again. Honestly, I'd like to see them try. The first time around, I was emotionally drained and depressed, not even bothering to fight back or prove them wrong. I just agreed to pay the alimony without contesting their claims. I was never toxic or controlling, despite their accusations, so she had no valid reason to cheat on me and didn't deserve a cent from the divorce. But I didn't care then. I just wanted to get the divorce over with, regardless of the financial toll. This time, though, I'm prepared to fight back and ensure my family learns a lesson they won't forget. In a surprising twist, my wife actually followed through on her threats and filed for a higher amount of alimony, citing my recent promotion. But this time, I wasn't going to let things go so easily. I reached out to all our mutual friends and laid out the truth about our situation, filling them in on past events since most of them were only aware of our separation and not the real reasons behind it. They were all understandably shocked, and I asked them to be prepared to testify against my wife if necessary, to which they agreed without hesitation. Additionally, I instructed my lawyer to push for discontinuing the entire alimony arrangement, as my wife clearly didn't deserve it. Over the past few days, I've been gathering all the evidence I could find of my parents' and brother's mistreatment towards me, showing how they never treated me as an equal and are now only hounding me for money because of my recent promotion. I've reached my breaking point, and I'm determined to rid myself of these toxic individuals once and for all. I made a conscious decision not to prioritize their feelings this time around. I managed to convince some of my cousins, who had witnessed my outsider treatment while growing up, to speak on my behalf. Despite not being particularly close, they agreed to support me. My lawyer was pleased with the evidence we had gathered, indicating it would likely lead to a successful case to stop paying alimony. While it was already known that my ex had cheated on me, her narrative portraying me as the villain and my brother as her savior were all based on lies. Even though I hadn't fought back last time, I was determined to set the record straight this time around, and I did just that. When confronted with video testimonials from friends and relatives supporting my side, My family had nothing to say for themselves. It seemed they expected to be let off the hook as easily as before, but I wasn't as emotionally fragile anymore. Their mistreatment had only made me stronger. Yesterday, it was officially finalized that I wouldn't have to pay my ex any alimony anymore, given the new information that surfaced. I felt like the happiest person on earth when I realized it was finally over. It was incredibly satisfying to see the smug look completely wiped off my family's faces. My ex looked like she was on the verge of tears, but I couldn't care less about her crying anymore. I was just done with the whole ordeal. I had planned to go home, treat myself to some great takeout, and watch a movie to celebrate, but as usual, my family had to ruin it. Just as I was a few yards away from my house, I noticed my brother's car parked outside. I was confused as to why he'd be there, but I went in anyway. To my surprise, my family was standing outside my door, blocking my way in. I was taken aback and didn't know what to say, but I decided to act like it didn't bother me and told them to get off my property or I'd call the police. That's when my dad spoke up, telling me that I should be ashamed of myself for what I'd done that day. He continued to lecture me, accusing me of lacking responsibility towards my family and betraying them by refusing to help when they needed it most. After he finished, I simply refused to engage in any conversation with him and stood there silently. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of provoking a reaction from me. It seemed like their goal was to get me so emotional that I'd eventually give in and do something rash and stupid. But I wasn't going to fall for it. Their desperate measures weren't going to help their case, which they should have realized by then. My silence seemed to only aggravate them further. Even though my mother demanded that I treat my dad with respect and talk to him, I still refused to speak. I could see they were getting increasingly agitated because they clearly hoped for a big fight, but nothing of the sort was happening. After more yelling, my brother finally snapped and grabbed me by the collar. He attempted to hit me, but my dad intervened just in time, pulling him back while shouting insults about me being a jealous loser who would never amount to anything. It was quite amusing coming from an unemployed guy still living with his parents and begging his brother for money to survive, but I digress. I warned them that they needed to leave or I'd call the cops. Given their financial situation, it seemed wise for them to make a run for it within the next 5 minutes. Reluctantly, they eventually left, but not before one last desperate attempt by my mother to shame me into giving them money. Of course, it didn't work, and they finally departed. It's been almost a day since then, and they haven't tried to contact me. I sincerely hope it stays this way. Now,